It's my privilege to introduce our speaker. You can read about Dorothy Marion, the particulars about her professionally and so forth in your bio outline in your program. But I would like to introduce her as a colleague and as a dear friend. I've known Dorothy for many, many years. And she is a very, very wonderful, talented woman who is very committed to this work. I see it day in, day out. I know people who have been benefited by her work, by her interventions, as well as the writings that she's done. She's going to downplay what she has contributed, but she's been a co-author on workbooks and articles that have helped literally thousands of people around the country. And I also know her to be a very, very wonderful, compassionate woman who knows about these issues that she's talking about today. She's been through her own trials, traumas in her life, and is a very resilient woman. And so I introduce to you Dorothy Marion.
Well, thank you, Dan. That was very kind. When Vonna Davis checked with me to see if I'd be able to present today, she said, we need something on relational trauma and how to heal from it. And she felt like what people are looking for, perhaps today also, are some real practical ideas and steps that you can take to begin to move through trauma, right? And so what I want to do is be able to do that today a little bit. But before I do so, I need to talk a little bit about relational trauma. Right? Like, what is that? Because people will say, well, what's the big deal with pornography? It's not that big of a deal. I'm like, oh, kind of is. Because you should see what it does to a relationship. All right, but Sue Johnson, who is she's out of Canada, and she's done a tremendous amount of research, and she works specifically with couples and does a lot in marriage therapy. She recently said that of all the cultural changes that have occurred over the last few years, the most pernicious to relationships has been the gargantuan increase in the amount and availability of pornography. Okay, so why? All right, so I want to overlay a little bit relational trauma, but I want to talk to you about it in terms of attachment. And if you understand attachment, you're going to understand why this is so painful and so traumatic. Right? All of us, we know that we come into this world, okay, we know this about babies, that we come wired to attach. If a baby doesn't bond with its mom, it doesn't thrive, okay? And so we know that that's really, really critical to survival. If you remember back in the 60s, we had all those terrible stories about orphanages where the babies weren't picked up and they were fed, but they weren't rocked or cared for or touched, and they died, okay? So attachment is really, really important. We come wired to attach. But what we understand now, over this last decade, more than we've ever understood before, is that we never outgrow that need for attachment. Okay, so we are looking for and working toward attachment throughout our lives, and the person that we generally attach to is our partner. And that's where we begin to form and get those attachment needs met. So if you look at attachment needs, here's kind of what attachment needs look like. If you're in a secure relationship, you can say yes to most of these questions. All right, will you be there for me when I need you the most? Do I matter to you? Am I a priority in your life? Will you value me and accept me even with my imperfections? Okay. Will you stay close to me? Those are our attachment needs, and that is what we're seeking for, and we get when we're in a healthy and a secure relationship. Okay, now, those of you who are married and you're looking at those questions, you're like, oh, I don't know if I can say yes to all of those. It's okay. All right, because what happens with attachment is we attach, sometimes that attachment gets off and then we realign, and then it gets off and we realign. And that's what we do with secure attachment. All right, they're doing a lot of really interesting research around attachment. And one of the funnest that I'm aware of is something called the hand-holding experiment. So there's a guy named Jim Cohen out of the University of Virginia, I believe. He's an assistant professor of neuroscience and he's a psychologist. So he decided to do this experiment, and he wanted to see the impact of stress on the brain within relationships. Okay, what happens when you're connected and when you're not connected? So he sent out a survey, so to speak, and he identified a group of couples who were pretty high on that attachment scale. In other words, they felt like they had a pretty good marriage and that they could rely on each other. All right, and so what he did in this experiment, and he's since reversed it, and it's the same, but he started out and he put the women in an MRI machine. Okay, so he wanted to create a stressful situation and then watch what happens in the brain and how do you manage the stress. So it's pretty stressful already to be in an MRI machine. You're kind of confined and it's really, really loud. But he wanted to make sure that they were feeling stress. And so in this experiment, he would rotate, and I don't know exactly how they did this, but the participant was able to see a blue circle on the top of the MRI. And it would come into focus. When you saw the blue circle, it meant you're fine, nothing's going to happen. But then he would rotate in a red X. And when they saw the red X, it meant that they had a 20% chance of being shocked. Okay? And they did get shocked. They got shocked on their ankles. Okay? And so you'd have this person trying to manage that really stressful situation. And then what he did is they imaged the brain and they would have a stranger come in and hold the participant's hand. And then they'd watch what happens in the brain as they kind of go through this experiment. And then they would have the partner or the woman's husband come in and hold her hand in these relationships where they reported that they had a secure attachment. Okay, and so what happened is as they imaged this woman's brain when she was all by herself, they said her brain just lit up like a Christmas tree. Right? There was so much that the brain had to do. It was so scary. Do I stay in this machine? Do I not? Do I move? I'm going to get shocked. How do I manage this? Okay, so a lot that the brain had to do. When they brought in a stranger to hold her hand, the brain calmed down a little bit. Okay, so all of that dimmed. It helped just to have another person there in the experience. I'm thinking for myself, I would have been really freaked out that I was holding the hand of a stranger. Okay? But it not in the brain. The brain calmed it down just a little bit. But the amazing piece of this is when the husband came in and held her hand, it's like somebody pulled the plug on the Christmas tree. Her brain just went back to calm, managing the stress. Okay. What they found, that there was a massive decrease in the way the brain responded to the threat, especially in the prefrontal cortex, associated with regulating emotion. So in other words, just by being in the presence of somebody that we're attached to, we can outsource our anxiety, our fear, our worry. Our brain doesn't have to work to do that. Okay, and that's what secure attachment looks like. And so, as Jim Cohen kind of did this, he said it was as if when that person was in the presence of someone that they were attached to, the brain was saying, getting the message, I am here with you, I am here with you, I am here with you. But then he got curious and he said, I wonder what's happening to the brain of the person, the partner who's holding the hand of his wife. What's going on in his brain? So then they did some research and they imaged his brain while they did her brain. And he said it was fun. It was amazing because what happened, he says, is the brain started to mirror each other. They started to look the same in that imaging. And in his words, he said it was if the brain was saying, I am you, you are me, we are here together, we are here together, we are here together. Okay? And that is the power of attachment. And that is what we come wired for. Right? Now, toss in pornography into that picture. The discovery that what I thought was going on in our relationship is not going on in our relationship. Okay? That dysregulates the brain. That throws the brain offline, if you want. And it creates relational trauma. Okay? As you know, you can find anything on the internet. Okay? That's why you're all here. Because people have found things on the internet. All right. But if you want to look at it a little bit this way, we start out in this longing for and working toward this attachment. And it's romantic, and we're in this starry night together, and our dreams are all in place, and we get married, and we grow in that relationship, and we settle down, and we become relatively good citizens and churchgoers, and we're moving forward in our lives. And then there is a discovery of a porn problem. Okay? And the wife is left absolutely disoriented, if you want to call it that. Okay? So the thing about relational trauma is it overwhelms the coping strategies and can define the relationship as a source of danger now, rather than a safe haven in times of stress. Okay, so my brain now says, where you were once safe, it feels dangerous to me. Okay. And the thing that makes relational trauma a little bit different than other traumas is in almost any other trauma, I am going to turn to my partner in order to help me get through it. Okay, so if I go home and my house is burning down, and I'm going to stand there with my husband in the street, and we're going to watch it burn, and we're going to go, oh, there goes our house. Oh, well, you won't have to clean it anymore. I know. Well, if we rebuild, can we make the closet bigger? We're going to get through this together. We're going to hold on to each other. We're going to be in it together. We are together. We are together. Okay? And that's the problem with relational trauma. The very person that you would normally turn to is the person that's betrayed you. And so there is a longing to go towards that person for connection, and then afraid of that, and back and forth, or I can't go there, it's too scary for me. Okay. And because we are wired to connect to others, the closer the person is who hurts us, the more traumatic the experience. All right. So, last piece about trauma. Okay. The technical definition then, it's a unique and personal experience of an event, a series of events, or a set of enduring conditions that has the effect of overwhelming the person's ability to integrate and regulate his or her experience at the levels of sensory motor, cognition, and emotion. In other words, I can't regulate my body, my feelings, my thoughts when I am in relational trauma. And pornography creates relational trauma. It's a betrayal to the relationship. Okay? So, briefly, I want to go over the symptoms of trauma. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. But if you were to look up post-traumatic stress disorder and look at the symptoms that go with that, you're going to find a lot of overlying symptoms, okay? Relational trauma mirrors post-traumatic stress disorder in some regard. Okay? And of course, you're going to have different symptoms depending on the situation. How did you find out about the betrayal? Has it been going on a long time? Is this something that you thought was taken care of and now it's not taken care of? I mean, there's many factors that are going to go into the symptoms of trauma on this, okay? But if you look at this list, and there's 3 slides of them, but you'll notice that they're all really difficult in terms of managing, okay? And I sometimes like to talk a little bit about this hypervigilant you become excessively alert or watchful. Okay, so you go home, what's going on? Is my partner on the computer? He left his journal out. I'm going to read his journal. Okay, we used to call that codependency, which is ridiculous. Okay, that is not codependency. That is relational trauma. Okay, I no longer feel safe. I am going to try really hard to control my daily experiences. I'm going to check up. I'm going to put filters on things. I am so dysregulated, I'm going to try to feel safe. Okay, that's what people do when they're in relational trauma. It breaks my heart sometimes when clients come in and the wife's gone through this horrific experience and she says, and I guess I'm codependent because, I'm trying to control him. Like, no, you're not codependent. You're in trauma. Okay, but that's it. That's a whole nother presentation. All right, but as you look through these, you can see that there's so many symptoms that go with this. And it takes quite a bit of time and effort to begin to heal through relational trauma. And while one is suffering from trauma symptoms, the hurt person will likely find it impossible to control thoughts, feelings, and relational interactions. To complicate things further, because the partner's addictive or compulsive behavior may continue, okay, there's further disclosure, the trauma may still be taking place. So you can have this capital T trauma of learning about the behavior. But then if that partner is working on trying to control that or not working on trying to control that, then you've got little t traumas going on and going on and going on. Okay? So it really complicates the life of a spouse. Because you're really living often in this low-grade place of trauma. All right, and so what happens, and I kind of want you to understand this because many of you have experienced this, and it feels a little bit crazy sometimes if you don't know what's going on. But you have the trauma that has happened, and then there can be anything simple or complicated in the environment that triggers you back into that feeling of the original trauma. Okay, so you can go home, your husband may be on the computer paying bills, but you walk in and it's like, whew, I don't feel safe. What are you doing? Why are you on the computer? Okay, and it can be anything. And this goes on for some time. I recently, I had several clients that came in and they thought their husbands were in treatment and they were trying to have a nice night out and they said, let's go to the movie Into the Woods. It's a musical, it's about fairy tales, okay? It's gonna be okay. Well, if any of you have seen that, so the baker's wife has a moment in the woods with the prince, right? There's just this moment in there and they sing back and forth. That triggered those women back into infidelity, betrayal. They didn't find the song amusing or interesting. I had a client that went to a movie, and in the movie the couple had the same flowers on the table that they had at their wedding, and she sobbed through the movie. Okay, that's trauma. It pulls you right back into those feelings, and it feels like you're out of control. You tend to know if you're having a trauma response if the response is bigger than the situation usually warrants. Okay, that's trauma. All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit then about what do you do? How do people get through this? And people do get through this. All right, there's something now, it comes out of positive psychology, and it's called post-traumatic growth. And it's defined as a positive change experienced as a result of the struggle with highly challenging life circumstances. And it's kind of what Ed Smart was referring to this morning. It is not about returning to the same life before the trauma, but rather it is about undergoing life-changing shifts that contribute to a personal process of change that is deeply meaningful. Okay? People come out of this, and they come out of it stronger and clearer and more directed in their lives. some of the questions to ask through this are, how do I come through this with a deeper understanding of myself or my partner? Can this be a catalyst for personal growth and change? Might I learn and come to value my own resiliency, a higher power, a stronger connection with others? But I want to also say, as we go through this, that it helps to understand the process. Betrayal really is a grieving process. There's so much loss when you find out that things aren't what you thought they were. So often, as you can imagine, through those symptoms that we saw in trauma, there's a loss of trust, sometimes a loss of respect, a loss of what you thought the past was. So all this time when I thought we were okay, you were doing this other thing. A loss sometimes of the dreams of the future, a loss of identity even, but I saw myself this way, or I saw you that way. Okay, so it's a grieving process, and grief takes time. And grief has a life of its own sometimes. It kind of comes and it goes and it finds us, and we're back in those stages of grief. Some of the little bit of the research right now says that it takes sometimes a year to 18 months when people are in treatment for those trauma symptoms to really settle down. Okay? That's a long time. And it can be longer if that addictive behavior or compulsive behavior is still going on. But being in treatment, it helps knowing how to deal with that and knowing that the person that struggles with the addiction is getting help. Okay. And even after 18 months, people don't say, I never have trauma responses again. But what happens is the trauma responses are further apart. And the individual knows how to handle them a little bit differently and quicker. And they're not so dysregulated. Okay. But one of the key pieces to this is that moving through relational trauma is learning to focus away from the trauma and toward self-value. How do I regain a sense of value? And you do that often through self-compassion and mindfulness. All right. So what about anger? Okay. It's helpful sometimes to understand the role of anger in relational trauma. So anger is a good thing. When we are threatened, we get angry and we protect ourselves. Okay? It's called or considered a survival emotion. And a lot of good things happen to us in one sense when we get angry. We have this rush of chemicals in our body. Okay? So adrenaline, and adrenaline numbs pain. So I'm betrayed, I get angry, and I'm out of pain. I have adrenaline. It creates a sense of power. I can act, and it helps me overcome what feels like a very dangerous moment or situation. Okay? But the problem with anger is because of that adrenaline, it is almost always followed by a drop of energy, returning the person back to pain, depression, and self-doubt. Okay, so I'm angry, I feel better, I drop down without that adrenaline back to feeling my pain, my self-doubt, my fear. Okay. So what can happen then is, in order to get out of pain, then I think of the trauma and I get angry again and I'm out of pain. And I feel like I have power. And then I drop and I feel bad again. And so I think of the betrayal. And the problem is the brain can get habituated into doing this. And ultimately, the biggest problem is it's exhausting and it's really not effective. Okay? And the problem with this is, while anger increases feelings of power, which would work if betrayal was about a loss of power. Okay, Okay, but betrayal, it's not about a loss of power. Betrayal is about a loss of value, right? It's a loss of feeling valued or worth within the relationship. I mean, think of it. I don't matter to you. You turned away from me in order to have a sexual experience. I can't count on you. I'm not a priority. I'm afraid I'm not lovable. I wasn't enough. And I can't meet your needs. Okay? That's about value. All right, so healing is going to be about focusing on value. How do I restore value to myself? All right. I'll get people sometimes in the office, women who are in the midst of relational trauma, and they'll say, I don't feel like myself. I'm using words that I didn't even know I knew. And you know what? I hit my husband. I don't know, I've never hit another person in my life. And up until this point, I used to catch flies and let them go outside. Okay? I don't know who I am. And I don't know, this feels so foreign to me. Well, it is foreign because that's not you. That's the trauma you. Okay? And so again, that's the reactive, traumatized person trying to get protected. So again, focusing on the who am I then? How do I get back to me? Is the beginning of trying to puzzle through some of this relational trauma piece. All right, so I'm going to present some exercises. Okay, and they're fairly simple, and it's really, really easy to minimize them. But what research is showing with this is if you're able to focus differently and see yourself differently and act differently, the emphasis on the act, then that creates some stronger neural connections in the brain. And we're more apt to change with those neural connections. Okay, so it's great to have good affirmations. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you need to couple those experiences with behavior, and you're going to probably do the best as you try to navigate some of this. Okay, so the first exercise, and I have handouts, but I didn't make enough, so someone else is going to figure that out for you. But I'm going to give those to somebody, and they have these exercises on them. All right, but this is a very simple exercise, but the importance again is focusing on value. Who am I? What do I value? So it's very simple. You take a piece of paper, fold it in half, 2 columns. On the first top column you say, I am. On the second side you say, I will. All right, and then you think about your values. What am I? What do I value? Well, I think I'm a kind person. So you write down, I am a kind person. Before all this, I thought I was fun. I'm fun. I'm generous. I'm caring. So the list is endless, but you're trying to get back to your core self, more of your authentic self, not your reactive self. And then you simply come up with behaviors that you can do during the day that will reinforce who you really are. Okay, so an example of that is, well, I'm a kind person, so today I will work really hard at being gentle with my children. Okay? Or I'm fun. Today I will sing along to the radio in the car. Okay? I am generous. Okay, I'm going to send a thank you note to the kid's teacher. Okay, do you see how it goes? I'm finding a behavior where I can reinforce that value. And then you do it. I wouldn't recommend, if you are fresh out of relational trauma, that you necessarily focus on the person that's betrayed you. You want to do these behaviors where it's not a difficult experience to do. Okay? You want to start where you can do it, because the point here is to be able to do it. And sometimes with all that disruption, it's really difficult to say, I am a kind person, but I am having a hard time being kind today, right now, to him, because he really, really hurt me and I don't know what to do with that yet. Okay, so start with someone that you can reach out to and be able to do that with. Okay? And then at the end of the day, you write yourself a little note and you just tell yourself what you did. So today, I acted on my deeper values by spending good time with the kids, singing in the car. I was thoughtful in thanking Mrs. Miller, and I was caring for my parents. Okay? So then every day you just pick, again, a value or two values or whatever you're capable of doing. Again, relational trauma it knocks the wind out of us, and so you have to start with something that you're able to do. Okay? A very simple exercise, but it really makes a difference. Okay? And a very similar exercise to that is one that expands a little bit our field of vision, because trauma narrows it. It's almost like putting blinders on. It's almost all you can see. Okay? And so through gratitude or appreciation is a way of kind of expanding one's vision. So in this exercise, again, it's very simple. You come up with 3 things that you appreciate about any kind of category. For instance, it would look something like this. So 3 things that I appreciate about my surroundings, my work, this time of year, my close friend, my parents, my children, my dog, my health. Okay? You can pick anything. And then you take the time to get mindful about that and say, well, what do I appreciate about this? And you remind yourself and expand your vision a little bit. Okay? So, my close friend, well, she's kind. She loves me. She's funny. My children, they're optimism. They are forgiving. They bring light into my life. All right? My dog, always happy to see me. Okay? Senses when I'm sad, loves to play. So you kind of get the idea of this. Is this going to completely heal relational trauma? No. But again, these are little milestones as you begin to focus on back to yourself, on that self-valuing piece. This next little piece is about oxytocin. Okay, so most of us are familiar with the chemical oxytocin. It's a chemical in our body. We all have it. Women that are breastfeeding have it the most, and researchers kind of call it the love chemical because it bonds us. It creates a sense of connectedness. And oxytocin often is created through touch. Okay? They did a little bit of research, and if you get a hug for about 7 seconds, which is kind of a long hug, your oxytocin in your body will increase. Okay, so the really funky thing about this is you can actually hug yourself and increase your oxytocin. Okay, so I can, probably in private, okay, just take a moment and kind of hug myself. And my skin doesn't care that it's me that's doing it. I'm kind of bonding with myself. Okay, I'm trying to be kind and bonding here. Okay, then the exercise, I know, I have a good slide here. Okay, so here's what oxytocin does in the body. Increased levels of it strongly increase feelings of trust, calm, safety, generosity, and connectedness, and also facilitates the ability to feel warmth and compassion for ourselves. Okay? It's an amazing chemical. Interestingly enough, I'm probably going to get on time. I won't. Okay. There's a mountain vole and a valley vole. Do you know what voles are? These little mice things. Most of them, they eat your grass. Okay. And I get confused which is which. But one of the voles, these voles are identical, except one of the voles, I think it's the valley vole, has oxytocin. It creates oxytocin, and those voles mate for life. Okay. The other voles that have no oxytocin are probably looking up for it. Okay? But it's a really important chemical. Okay? And we can increase it ourselves by just touch, by being connected physically. This exercise that is kind of fun to do is what you do is you spend a few days trying to really pay attention to the voices in your head. Okay? We will grow and heal and change. Is more likely that we will do that in an environment of compassion rather than criticism. And the biggest environment that we live in is the one in between our ears. Okay? We have ongoing chatter. Okay? Most of us have like a mean girl in our heads, or a mean man, mean boy, okay, that is really, really critical. And we just get used to that. So what you're trying to do with this exercise is you're going to pay attention to, what do I say to myself? How do I handle circumstances? Am I berating myself? Am I putting myself down? What's the tone I use when I'm criticizing myself, so to speak? And what they found is many of us have a catchphrase that we use over and over again. And when I've talked to different clients about that, I had one woman, I remember, she said, when she started to pay attention, she said, you know what I say to myself all day long? She says, nice try, fatty. That's what she's, nice try, fatty. So how would it be? I mean, think about it. If you met someone and they, hi, how are you doing? Hey, nice try, fatty. I heard you tried to do something today. Yeah, right? She heard that over and over again. Okay, so it's paying attention to that. And then once you start to identify that, do I have a catchphrase? How do I talk to myself? You talk to yourself differently. Okay? And while you talk to yourself differently, compassionately, lovingly, you rub your arm, you pat your cheeks, okay? You increase oxytocin. So it would make no sense if I identified the voice in my head which was really critical, and then I was like, stop doing that, you idiot, right? I want to say to myself lovingly, so I would say, oh, I can't believe I ate that entire bag of Oreos. And I would say, hey, it's okay. I know you were pretty stressed and you thought that might help. That's really hard. You're going through some really hard things right now. How about we take ourselves out for a walk? Okay? So I'm trying to talk lovingly and kindly to myself. It makes a big difference. Okay? Because we do hear that criticism, that negativity. Right? All right, so as they've kind of done some research on self-compassion, it is a huge factor in healing. This idea that healing comes from self-compassion. Compassion means to suffer. Self-compassion is to suffer with ourselves. I remember reading once about this. Someone said, how come is it that when little kids get lost, sometimes in a store, they'll run up and down the aisles, calling out, Mom, Mom, Mom. And then when they're reunited, then they start to cry. And they said, it's because they're expressing compassion for themselves at that time. They're crying because that was really, really hard. And they're very compassionate at that point, going, that was really good. And I think if we can understand that and be able to do that for ourselves. All right, so research says there's 3 components of self-compassion. The first one is self-kindness. Okay. Can I be gentle and understanding with myself? The second component is something that they call common humanity. And what that means is, do I have the ability to understand that I'm not alone in this? That what I'm experiencing is a common emotion or experience, that sometimes to suffer is to be alive, that we all go through it. And I can identify that with other people that way. And then the third one is mindfulness. And mindfulness in this context is that we are able to hold our experience in balanced awareness. And what that means is I have a little bit of space from what's going on with me and that I can observe it. Mindfulness is about observing. Oh, I'm feeling, this is what's going on with me right now. All right, so this next exercise is a simple one. Well, they're all pretty simple. But this is sitting down and writing a letter of self-compassion to yourself. They did it, again, a little bit of research. People that did it wrote a self-compassion letter every day for 7 days, measured with less, they measured their depression, they wrote these letters, and then they measured it again 6 months later, and they found that even 6 months later it had effect on decreasing depression and anxiety. Okay, a really important tool. So here's how you would do this. You'd sit down, you would pick something stressful or difficult that you were experiencing. You would write yourself a common humanity message and a self-kindness message. Okay, so here's how it would go. You write in second person and describing what you're feeling, not necessarily the event. So, dear Karen, I can tell you're feeling really hurt right now. Or, I can see you're really regretting your decision. I can see you're really beating yourself up and you feel embarrassed and disappointed. So you're describing the emotions. Okay. And then you write yourself the common humanity piece. You remind yourself that you're not alone, that other people are going through this. It's part of being human. And then you write yourself a self-kindness message. What do you need to hear to feel supported, encouraged, or understood? What advice might you give yourself? Okay. And again, all of these exercises are focusing on how do I value myself? How do I get back that sense of this is who I am and I am of value? And this experience that I'm having over here of relational trauma is something that has happened to me, but it isn't who I am. Okay. So an example might look something like this. So this is kind of describing the experience. Dear Barbara, I can tell you are feeling really awful about the fight you had with Bob this morning. You feel lost and angry and are wondering if you're going to make it. Common humanity. You are not alone in this. Marriage is struggle, and a lot of people are going through this and have faced similar challenges. You have been through a lot and you're doing your best. Don't give up. This is so tricky to navigate and will take some time. You are strong and courageous. Trust yourself to be able to get through this. Okay? Fairly short letter, but one where you're nurturing yourself. And then obviously what you do is you write it and then you read it. You write it and you read it. Okay. All right, this next component here is a little bit about mindfulness. And I think nowadays you hear about mindfulness all the time. And it's kind of trendy. But the reason it's kind of trendy is we can image the brain. And now we know, oh, mindfulness works. It really, really changes the brain. Okay, so one way of defining mindfulness is looking into oneself in the spirit of self-inquiry and self-understanding. It's a process of regulating attention to the present moment with the quality of curiosity, non-judgment, and acceptance. In other words, I'm just going to focus on what is going on with me right now, and I'm not going to be judgmental about it, and I'm going to be very accepting about it. Another definition is mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And the reason we do this is because mindfulness gives you time. Time gives you choices. Choices, skillfully made, lead to freedom. You don't have to be swept away by your feeling. You can respond with wisdom and kindness rather than habit and reactivity. So I am going to try to slow down this process and get mindful about what's going on. This next little exercise uses mindfulness, and one way to remember it is with the acronym PRAISE. All right, so you start kind of this idea of praise. So the P stands for pause. You slow things down. I'm going to refocus on what's going on with me. I'm going to breathe. So when experiencing triggers or thoughts of the trauma, slow it down. And then I'm going to recognize the reactivity. And what that means is I want to figure out, how am I responding to this? What are my behaviors? What am I doing with all of this? Okay. Am I withdrawing? Am I shutting down? Am I fighting? Am I eating? What am I doing? Then I'm going to investigate a little bit. No, first I'm going to accept and I'm going to allow those feelings. So I'm going to say, wow, I've got this going on. I'm feeling really disrupted. I feel angry. I'm withdrawing. All right. I'm just going to accept and allow that. That's what's going on with me. Okay, good information. But then I'm going to investigate those feelings a little bit. I'm going to explore them. Is there anything underneath the feelings? Well, I'm really, really angry. Well, what else is going on? I'm afraid. I'm afraid that this isn't going to work out. Are there attachment needs coming up? Yeah, I'm not sure I feel like a priority. I'm kind of scared that if he acts out, that he's not going to be there for me. And I'm afraid of that. Okay, so you're really just kind of investigating that. And then S is sense. But the S ought to really be at the beginning, because it connects you to all of the different categories. Where do I sense this in my body? Our bodies tell us where we're feeling emotions. Okay, so we pay attention to, oh, I'm afraid and I feel it right here in my heart, or my shoulders are tight. Okay, and then as we do this, we're able to kind of understand what's going on with us, and over time, it's this sense of enlighten. Okay, it's provided me with information and understanding of the different levels of emotions and beliefs that are attributed to the trauma or the situation. Okay? And I'm not just into that reactive fight or flight, freeze, frenzy place that trauma takes us. It slows down that process, and then I can have some choices. Okay. All right, lastly, the last one I want to touch on today is self-care. If you are to go to a 12-step program for addiction recovery, they'll often talk a lot about dailies, okay? Something that you do on a fairly regular basis, on a daily basis, that can anchor you and ground you, and again, help to regulate all of those emotions that you're going through with relational trauma. Okay? And it's kind of uses all of the exercises that I've given you, all kind of come into play when you think about self-care. It's a tremendous way of showing compassion to myself. I'm being kind to myself, and I'm trying to be really mindful about, what do I need right now? What is going to help me? How am I going to feel anchored? So one way of looking at self-care is you can break it into different categories, and there's a lot of ways to do that. But one way is to maybe look at, how am I doing with my relationships with others? How can I get self-care through those activities? What about emotionally? What about physically? Okay, what about spiritually? So sometimes, often the women that I work with who are going through relational trauma have a difficult time defining self-care. They've been so focused on the relationship and trying to take care of the relationship and all the other people in their lives that they've forgotten or not experienced, how do I actually take care of myself? Because if I do, that kind of feels selfish. But But actually what happens if you're able to take care of yourself, your capacity to care for others is greatly increased. Okay? So if ever there was a time to learn how to do self-care, it would be in the midst of relational trauma. And the nice thing about self-care is once the relational trauma settles down, it's not something that you get rid of. It's kind of like, oh, I get to do this for life. I'm so excited. I just figured out how to take care of myself. Okay, so it's a real amazing life skill. But some ways, again, there are a million different ways to do self-care, but because people sometimes struggle with, well, what do you mean relationship with others? Okay, so the number one piece is to avoid isolation. Trauma takes us away from people. It feels very, very isolating. I used to say when someone's struggling with a porn addiction comes out of the closet, the wife usually goes in. You know, who do you tell? Who do you share this with? And it's very, very easy to isolate. So you want to find people in your life that can be supportive. But you also, most people are trying to stay in the relationship and see if it can heal. So you want to pick people that can support the relationship, not just you. The last thing you need is for somebody to tell you, you're amazing and you ought to do this. Then you end up having to protect your husband, which is exhausting. You don't need that. You need people that can be supportive, that say, I care for you. I'm going to help you through this. What do you need? All right? Spending time with other people. Engaging with children. Service. Writing a letter to a loved one. Activities, chores, okay? Being involved with people. Smiling at someone, even who's considered, what's my relationship with others? Okay? Playing on a sports team. Participating in a group. That's why support groups are so valuable in this type of a situation. Okay, and then focusing on emotional well-being. Again, there could be pages and pages, but writing in a journal, having and finding out what are good boundaries with others. Can I figure out how do I say no? Because I'm so overwhelmed right now. I'm going through some really, really difficult things. How do I slow things down for myself? How do I say no? I think we need classes in our many different ways on just videos of women saying no. Just like, what does it look like? Okay? Seeking support, enjoying beauty in the outdoors, music, art, quiet time, joining a support group, asking for help, spending time with people who support you. Okay? Physical well-being. And it's not just exercise we're talking about here, but how do I relax? Can I take time to relax? Long walks, getting adequate sleep, spending time outside, cutting back on the use of media. Oof. Keeping a food journal, limiting caffeine, or increasing caffeine. Soaking in a tub, yoga, dance, gardening, all of these. It's ways of taking care of ourselves physically. And this idea of spiritual well-being. And again, it doesn't have to be necessarily spiritual in that I believe in a God. It can be spiritual in that I have a sense of a greater, something bigger than myself. Okay? So sometimes people will knock that off because of a belief issue, but I'm talking about being able to see a bigger picture or a bigger power. Okay? Prayer, meditation, spiritual reading, attending religious services or other ceremonies, finding ways to serve others, okay? Listening to uplifting music, singing, reading spiritual affirmations. Okay? The list can go on and on again. Right? All of these, hopefully, are ways to begin to navigate this experience of trauma. Again, bringing you back to yourself. I don't know anyone that I have talked to that said that they ever wanted to be on this journey. Okay? And nobody should be on this journey by themselves. Okay? Even remember the hand-holding experience. Even holding the hand of a stranger helps us get through these experiences. When they looked at post-traumatic growth and some of the results of that, what they found was that people were able to say, you know what, coming through this experience, I never would have wanted this, I never would have wished this on anybody, but guess what? I have a greater appreciation of life. I have a changed sense of my priorities. I'm warmer, I have more intimate relationships, greater sense of personal strength, recognition of new possibilities or paths for my life and my spiritual development. Okay? And often these things can happen in the healing that goes on with our partner, because that can happen as well. And what you need to know, again, is that people get through this. Okay? They come out the other side different, but they often come out stronger. But we need to do it together. It's really, really difficult alone. And I really honor those of you who are here who are in a journey with someone who is going through this or going through this yourselves. It's such a growing and learning and amazing experience. Okay? And I wish you the very, very best in it. All right? So thank you.